and welcome to our March Fireside Chat. The topic tonight is foraging, one of my favorite topics, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of the wild plants that I found in my forest yesterday when I was working in the woods, as well as hearing from you what some of your favorite wild plants are, either that you're finding this spring or that you forage throughout the year. And we'll get into that in a little bit. If you're joining us for the first time, this Fireside Chat event is a monthly event that we host. And we've been doing this, we did this all last year, continuing it through this year. And each month we touch on a different topic related to small woodlands management. Occasionally it's just me talking about something that I think I know something about. Sometimes we invite in a specialist to talk about a topic that's outside of my wheelhouse. And more recently, we've been turning the microphone over to you all to share your experiences. And I've found that that's been my most favorite part of this, is hearing from all of you and the shared wisdom of the people that join us. If you're also not familiar with our organization, the Northwest Natural Resource Group, we are a small woodland owner membership-based organization. We've got a couple hundred members scattered throughout the Northwest. We're a very eccentric and eclectic community of small woodland owners that I really enjoy being a part of. Our organization specializes in ecologically based forestry. And so we both bring educational programming like this to small woodland owners, and we get out on the ground with you, do consulting, manage timber harvests, do restoration work, all sorts of things. I invite you to go to our website, NNRG.org, to learn more about us. And with that as an introduction, I'm also joined by Alex Dolk, who has been running all of these fireside chats, and Alex is the instigator of all of our public outreach programs and workshops. So if you interact with us through any of our outreach, you'll definitely be in contact with Alex. So here's what I'd like to do this evening. I'm just going to chat a little bit about foraging and edible medicinal plants. I want to share with you some of the plants that I saw in my woods yesterday. So some of the fresh spring, or maybe not so fresh, some of the leftover dregs of winter that are still out there. And then I have a few resources, some books that I want to share with you. And then again, I want to turn this over to you all to hopefully share some of your experiences with native edible medicinal plants. And one thing that I'm going to ask Alex to do, Alex is always great in following up with all of the participants in these fireside chats, sending out an email just chock full of resources. And what Alex is going to do tonight is keep a list going of all of the plants that people talk about and their uses, again, whether they're edible, medicinal, ornamental, whatever. And that list will then be sent out to everybody. So hopefully that'll be a great resource, enduring resource for you all. So a little bit about my experience with edible plants, medicinal plants. Years ago, I can't believe this is already, going on just about 30 years ago, when I was a caretaker at the Wild Thyme Farm in Oakville. I used to host all sorts of workshops on agroforestry and permaculture. And a good friend of mine, Michael Pilarski, otherwise known as Skeeter, is a professional wildcrafter. As part of his vocation, he goes out, harvests mostly medicinal plants from the wild, processes them, sells those materials to large natural pharmaceutical companies. And so we were hosting a workshop on edible medicinal plants at the farm. As part of that workshop, we took a walk through the woods. And this is a second growth mixed hardwood conifer forest. And over the course of, I think it's maybe a 2-hour walk at most, we identified 80 I think it was a little more than 80 different plants that either had edible or medicinal qualities to them, which was my kind of first introduction to the panoply of plants out there that provide such beneficial uses to us. And when we were in particular talking about the edible plants, Michael made a statement that has always stuck with me. And he said, once you learn everything that's edible in the forest, it's really hard to starve to death. And I thought that was just great. And I've kind of kept that with me. And I've found that whenever I'm working in the woods, I'm constantly munching on things. And if you ever get out for a walk with me, you'll probably notice this. And I'm always reaching here and there, picking something from the forest, chewing on it. I consider it to be one of my greatest fatherly qualities, and that I've taught my two kids most of what's edible in the forest, and in particular to distinguish between what's edible and what's palatable. And so oftentimes when I'm walking around the woods with my two kids, I'll be pointing out different things, and they'll comment, well, yeah, that is edible, but it's not particularly palatable. But at least they know the difference. And sure, should they get stuck in the woods somewhere, I've got a high confidence that they'll be able to sustain themselves for a period of time. Most of these plants I put in the category of survival food, not necessarily something that I would want to sustain myself off of for a long period of time, and definitely gives me great appreciation for some of the first peoples that lived in our area, and how they were able, obviously, to sustain themselves off these native plants. So on that note, relative to some resources that I want to share with you, and I'm going to ask Alex to put these on our list before we send them out. I don't know how easy it'll be for you to see these, but definitely one of the go-to books. And if you don't have this, I highly encourage you to get a copy of this. Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast, a fantastic book on native plants, has full color images. And aside from describing the ecology that these plants grow in, it also has notes on their ethnobotanical qualities. Ethnobotanical meaning their uses to First Peoples in our region. Great book. Similarly, another one of my favorite books, Food Plants of the Pacific People, of coastal First Peoples, excuse me, and a great book. This is by Nancy Turner, who is a professor of ethnobotany, I believe, the University of British Columbia. A second book by Michael Moore. This has been around for probably 40 years or so, and really detailed information on the medicinal uses of native plants. And then I believe Erna Gunther was a professor at the Evergreen State College, and she put together this book on ethnobotany that for decades was considered to be one of the definitive texts on ethnobotany in the Pacific Northwest. So just some resources for you to refer back to. And again, we'll send all of those out to folks. And I see a question, can we add those into the chat? Again, we'll be sending a list of these books out along with the list of all the plants that we talked about tonight within just a few days to all of the people that have registered for this. So with that as a bit of a preamble, look at that, Alex is right on it. She's already got them in the chat there, so you can check that out. Thanks, Alex. What I want to do is share, so I was working in my woods yesterday down at our Bucota forest, and took the opportunity to take a photo of a number of plants. And so I'm going to share these with you. And first of all, and if you're willing to, let's see here, unmute yourselves, I want to play What Is. So can somebody identify this plant based on its leaf?
Indian plum.
Indian plum, yes, otherwise also known as osoberry. You are correct. Awesome. So for those of you that are familiar with osoberry, what do the leaves taste like?
Cucumber. Cucumber.
Cucumber, that's right. Both the leaves and the flowers taste like cucumber. And if anybody is not familiar with this, it is uncanny. So I encourage you, you likely have this in your woods. If you have moist soils, kind of a clay loam soil, if you have alder on your land, you likely have osoberry. And I encourage you to go out and right now, at least on my land down in Bakota, a little bit south of Olympia, they're just beginning to leaf out, as you can see in this photo. Both the leaf and the little white flower taste like the rind of cucumber, kind of a bitter cucumber taste. And, you know, that may not seem like the most pleasant flavor to everybody, but I think the novelty factor of that will win you over. So check that out. Also, later in the summer, as the berry itself begins to ripen, it'll turn kind of a dark purple. And I find it's very tasty. A little bit astringent also, but the longer it goes, the sweeter it gets. There's a big seed inside of it, so you don't really get a lot of pulp out of it. But again, I chalk this up to the novelty value. It's fun to walk through the woods and eat the leaves, the flowers in the early spring, and the berries a little later. All right, next plant. This isn't the best photo. Looks a little tired, a little haggard, but who can identify this? I think I heard a dog bark. I'm not sure what that was, but anybody hazard a guess at what this is? Very low growing, obviously, kind of ground cover. And
Wall?
nope. One of the earliest occupations in the Northwest ate this, and it's blank lettuce.
Miner's lettuce.
Miner's lettuce. Yep. And I'm not entirely sure if this is a spring leaf, or again, if this is something that made it through the winter. It was kind of a cold morning, so again, it's looking a little droopy, but I did eat it, still edible. One of the things that I enjoy about miner's lettuce, it has a really strong mineral flavor to it. I mean, it really feels like you're getting nutrition out of this little plant. And it's something that I forage off of through most of the summer. It's very hardy, so it sticks around through the better part of the year. Now, most people are going to recognize this. This is a pretty ubiquitous plant.
Great.
Oregon grape, yes. So, you know, it doesn't have an edible aspect to it at this point in the year. Obviously, it produces clusters of you know, what we colloquially refer to as grapes later in the summer. But how many of you are aware of its medicinal value? If you scrape back the bark on the stem of the Oregon grape, it'll expose this yellow sort of cambium layer. And that cambium layer, the yellow, is derived from an alkaloid called berberine. I may not be pronouncing that quite right, berberine, which amongst numerous medicinal values is an antimicrobial. So I haven't harvested this and processed it myself, but I've purchased creams and salves that have Oregon grape in it. And you can scrape the bark off, scrape just that cambium layer, dry it, process it, and put that into either tinctures for internal use or salves for external use as an antimicrobial. Who can identify that leaf?
Doc.
Dock, yes, we've got an expert out there. Yellow dock, western dock, definitely not the best time of year to be eating this. This leaf certainly overwintered. Right now it would be very bitter, but the fresh spring shoots that should be coming up, I think you can see one there right now, and will be more prominent over the next month or so, are eaten fresh, steamed. The fresh spring leaves, not this one that's over winter, but the fresh ones coming up are oftentimes steamed and used as spinach. The stalks sometimes are cooked much like rhubarb, although very different flavor. And also it's a taprooted plant, and the taproot is chock full of minerals, very similar to dandelion. And you can chop that up and put that into soups for a good hit of nutrition and minerals. All right, so for your dormant season twig identification, who can identify this twig? The thorns should give it away.
Salmonberry?
It's not salmonberry. Good guess though.
Is there a rose?
Rose, yes. So this is our woodland rose or Nootka rose. And the rose hips, the little fruits that the rose produces are one of the native plants that are highest in vitamin C. You can make a tea out of that. The leaves also can be used. And I believe other parts of the plant can be used as well, edibly, medicinally, but they're primarily known for their rose hips. All right, similarly, and somebody just guessed this correctly, the copper color of the bark gives it away. This is salmonberry. Obviously later in the summer, delicious berry, sometimes a little tart, but in the springtime, probably in about a month or so, the new spring shoots that come up can be peeled and eaten like asparagus. I've never done this. I've heard of this, so this is purely conjecture and what I've picked up from other people. If anybody out there has, on our group tonight, has eaten the shoots of salmonberry, I would love to hear a firsthand account of that experience. And if nobody has, then I want somebody to anonymously volunteer to do that and report back to us. I'll see if I can remember when I'm out there to give it a try. But again, the fresh spring shoots, you can peel them, eat them like asparagus. I'm hoping this is the year that I actually remember and I'm in the right place at the right time. So I believe the last plant is my favorite. Who can identify that strange alien creature?
Nettle.
Nettles, yes. Actually, I have a video on NNRG's YouTube channel of harvesting and eating nettle leaves fresh. There's a little trick to it without getting stung. I'm not going to disclose my my secrets. I'll have to save that for an in-person walk in the woods. But nettles are just beginning to pop up in my Bakota forest. They're only a couple inches tall right now. I like to wait until they're usually 4 to 6 inches before I begin harvesting them. But probably one of the most potent medicines that we have, incredibly rich in minerals, iron. We use it like spinach, and we steam it. We put it into soups. We also make a nettle pesto, so replacing basil with nettle. Just a fantastic plant, lots of different uses for it. Years ago, when I was farming more, I used to harvest it and make it into steep it in water as a nutritional tea for the garden. So all sorts of great uses for nettle. I think, yes, that is it. So with that as, let me stop sharing here. It's kind of a highlight of some of the plants that I harvest. Just to add to it a few other things. I love harvesting the fresh conifer tips from both Douglas-fir, grand fir, again, very high in vitamin C. We make tea out of those. We eat them fresh. Those should be coming out probably in another month and a half or so, maybe 2 months. and gosh, all sorts of things out there. So with that, I would love to turn it over to all of you and hear from you. What are some of the favorite spring, summertime? We don't have to limit ourselves to this particular time of the year, but throughout any point in the year, what are some of your favorite plants to forage from the wild? Feel free to share. Somebody mentioned cleavers in the chat. I don't know if you're willing to unmute and share what you do with cleavers, but I'd love to hear about that. I've got an anecdote that I can share, but what do you do with cleavers?
Cleavers are one of the first herbs that present themselves in the springtime, and they are used medicinally for lymphatic flow, which usually in the wintertime we're not moving around as much, so it's great to stimulate your lymphatic system. In the springtime, I'd like to do a spring cleaning, so it's great for that. And then if you harvest a lot, you can juice it and then freeze them into ice cube trays, and so you always will have it in your freezer. Just pop it in a cup, add a little bit of hot water, or just let it melt itself. But yeah, lymphatic flow primarily.
Fantastic, that's great. I've also heard, maybe you can verify this, that it's for people that have gallstones, that it can dissolve gallstones. Well, I'll share one anecdote. Maybe this is a little bit of warning for folks. So this is probably 15 years ago. I was asked to lead a group of school kids through the forest. Actually, there's a couple school buses showed up, and I was one of numerous different tour guides. So I got my merry band of pranksters, and we took off into the woods. And along the way, of course, we're picking up sticks and this, that, and the other thing. And I found cleavers. And so we made headdresses from the cleavers, because for those of you that aren't familiar with cleavers, they're kind of like nature's Velcro. They have a very Velcro-y texture to them. And so we made these headdresses. And by the time that we got back to the school bus, it was like the band from the Lord of the Flies had shown up. We were scratched and muddy and feral, and it was fantastic. And so a couple of weeks later, I got this whole slew of cards in the mail from the kids that I had taken. They said, "Mr. Hanson, thank you for the tour. This is great. We had a wonderful time. This, that, and the other thing." And one of the cards that I opened up said, "Gosh, I really had a wonderful time, but I discovered that I was allergic to cleavers and ended up in the hospital." So I had never heard of that before. It definitely tempered my enthusiasm for draping small children with cleavers. I haven't done that since, but you may want to approach them with some caution, or maybe process them to some degree. So I don't know how common it is to be allergic to cleavers, but anyway, with that as a cautionary tale. I'm seeing a few other comments pop up. Hazelnuts, of course. Although I would ask, how successful are you at harvesting hazelnuts that actually have nuts in them? I've found that by the time the hazelnuts are ripe, when I go to harvest them, the only nuts that are left on the bush are the empty ones. It seems like the jays have this amazing knack for knocking on the hazelnuts, knowing which ones has a nut inside, which don't, and of course leaving the empty ones on the bush. Maybe somebody else has a trick for getting a ripe and edible hazelnut. Anyway, I would love to have other people unmute and share their experiences, their favorite plants.
I'll share something. I used to really enjoy in the field snacking on sheep sorrel. So another rumex like the Western dock, but sorrels, very tangy.
Yeah, sorrel is good. Anybody else?
We like to harvest dandelions and make dandelion jam out of it, the dandelion flowers.
made a jam out of dandelion. That's interesting. If you have a recipe for that and are willing to share that with us, and you could follow up by email afterwards if you're not able to put that into the chat, we'd love to include that. And that goes for anybody. If you have a recipe that you're willing to share, Alex wrote a great article in our blog post or blog section on our website that includes recipes for different native plants. One thing I've done with dandelions is I've taken the flowers and deep fried them. So, battered them and fried them as a little snack, and those were delicious. I mean, dandelions are just amazing. I mean, you can eat every part of them, from the flower, the fresh spring leaves are really high in nutrients. The roots also very high on minerals. Oftentimes we harvest those and wash them and put them into soups. Just an amazing, obviously also a great early spring bee forage. I think calling dandelion a weed is a tremendous disservice to its ecological functions. Anybody else?
I've always wanted to do frying the great big leaf maple flowers, but I've never done it. I've heard people say they've done it, but secondarily. So if anybody's done it here, I'd love to hear more details about how to do it.
Yeah, I'm right with you. I've heard of the big leaf maple flower fritters, and same thing.
Right.
I haven't quite marshaled the discipline to harvest them and process those. But yeah, I'd love to hear firsthand from anybody also if they've done that.
I tapped my big leaf maples this spring and made maple syrup.
How'd that work out?
It was great. I'm in Deer Island. We had a couple cold stretches that were below freezing at night and up above freezing during the day. And I just used stainless steel taps and actually just bought distilled water like in the milk jugs and tied those to the trees with hay twine. And when I boiled it down, it took about 12 gallons to give me about half pint. But it's really, really good. So it was fun. It was successful.
How long did it take to boil it?
I have one of those outdoor burners, the propane burners, and it took about a day and a half of like 6-hour days, and then I brought it inside to do the final boiling process. But once you get it going on the outdoor burner, you just check it every half hour and it just goes along, and you just keep adding sap, and it's really was pretty easy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I grew up in Minnesota, the land of the true sugar maple, and my family had 80 acres of forest land back there. And each spring we would go out and tap the sugar maples. My sisters and I, it was our job to collect the sap bags and bring them back to the sugar shack where my dad was boiling down the sap. And I haven't had a chance to do that yet here in the Northwest. I understand that you've got to hit your timing just right. So, on those rare days when it's actually freezing, to be able to tap the tree, and you've got a very narrow window of time between collecting the sap and beginning the boiling process. Lori, do you live on your land?
Yes. So side note, I grew up in Wisconsin, so same kind of, so I never had maple trees, but the ratio of sap to syrup there is much higher. I do live on my land, and what I actually have is clump maples, because before I lived here, the forest was not managed completely properly. But on some of the clump maples, I put in 3 taps, and some of those side shoots gave me like 3-4 gallons.
Wow.
Over like a gallon a day. So it was really quite impressive how much sap I could get if I really wanted to process that much.
That's great. Yeah, I did have a chance to taste some big leaf maple syrup from one of our members last year, and I was surprised at how similar to conventional maple syrup it tasted, even though the sugar content is a lot lower. The flavor was still very similar, and
Yeah.
neat.
I just
Yeah,
read a part. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just read a part in Braiding Sweetgrass where the author talked about how her tribe used to like put the sap in a trough and let it freeze, and like you'd take what froze and you removed would be the more watery part of it. It would leave a more concentrated layer.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. I did sometimes when I went to get the gallons off the trees, they were frozen. So I've got that book. I might kind of research that. I'm going to try next year and try to measure the bricks and be a little bit more scientific about it.
So what else, folks? What other odd arcane products are you harvesting out of the woods and processing, experimenting with, nibbling on? Has anybody harvested fiddleheads? It's one of those things that, again, I feel like, decades ago, I should have been on top of and harvesting every year, and still haven't yet. My understanding, it's the bracken fern in the Northwest that produces the edible fiddlehead, but I've yet to harvest it myself. Anybody out there have experience with that?
I bought some at a farmer's market a couple of years ago, actually a while ago, and made them into an omelet. And I have to say it was weird. I did not like it, but that might have been my preparation. I don't, in that realm, perhaps in the asparagus world, but it was the texture, I think, that bothered me. So again, preparation probably was off. Has anybody done anything with knotweed? Apparently Japanese knotweed is edible and tastes a little bit like rhubarb.
I was just looking at the recipe in the link that you sent out for hummus made out of knotweed. Shock. I didn't know you could eat knotweed. You better make sure that it wasn't an area that people use poison on, though.
Yeah, great point. Yeah. It's a very slow way to eradicate knotweed, but if you want to, you could just eat it all.
I'm curious if only the bracken fern fiddleheads work. I grew up in Maine and we ate fiddleheads a lot in the spring. And I loved them. My mom would make them, steam them, and they would be kind of firm. Then she'd put butter on them, and anything with butter is good. But I thought I read somewhere that the wood fern you can also do. I'm just curious if anybody knows. Here.
Definitely, the next time that we revisit this topic, I will draw from I've got a few friends that specialize in native edibles and ethnobotanicals, and I think we'll have an expert on this. We're definitely in the anecdotal realm here with all of this. Well, some of us definitely have direct experience for sure, but. Well, again, back to my earlier point of people anonymously volunteering, what I would love to hear from any of you over time as you get out there and begin harvesting this spring through the summer, share with us your experiences or recipes that actually worked out. And we'll continue to archive those on our website and build up a body of knowledge and experience there. Because I've found that, in my 30 years or so of working with small woodland owners, probably the one topic that is of greatest interest to folks is just this, the edible medicinal plants, those things that we can glean from our forests that are other than timber products. There's a question, of course, has anybody done anything with elderberry? I can't believe that I overlooked this. This is probably the one consistent plant that I work with every year, the blue elderberry, a little bit rare in Western Washington. I have one plant on my land. A neighbor of mine has a large shrub in her front yard. And every summer I go out and harvest the elderberries and process them into a syrup. It's very good for boosting the immune system. So in my family, it's kind of required medicine in the fall and winter time when it's cold and flu season. I always keep a mason jar in the fridge of elderberry syrup. And I boil it down and then mix it with a little bit of honey just to make it a little bit more palatable. But I find it to be a delicious medicinal syrup, and really fun to work with. Sometimes it's a little trick to get to it before the, not the starlings, what are the cedar waxwings descend upon the shrub, and in one day they'll completely strip it. So you've got to get to it usually in kind of late August or so. But blue elderberry, a fantastic medicinal plant.
And just so we're clear, the red elderberry is kind of causes stomach problems, right?
Yeah, poisonous. Yep.
Okay.
Definitely want to stay away from the red. So the blue and the black elderberry are the medicinal ones. I'm not aware of black elderberry being native either in eastern or western Washington. The blue elderberry, Sambucus caerulea, I'm sure I didn't pronounce that right, is the medicinal and edible variety. Somebody's mentioning aronia berries, so not necessarily a native plant, but grows prolifically in the Northwest. I have aronia in my yard here in Olympia that I planted, and just an absolute workhorse of a berry. It never seems like there is a bad year or an off year for aronia. It always produces just ginormous clumps of blueberry-like berries. Very astringent and fresh, not the most pleasant eating fresh, I've found, but given its prolific production, great for making jams out of or juicing. What else? Let's see. Nobody has mentioned oxalis yet. That's one of my favorite forest edibles. Kind of looks like a large 3-leaf clover. Very tart flavor. You can kind of taste the, I don't know if it's high in vitamin C or not, but it sort of tastes like it should be anyway. Love munching on that. Hence the name, it has a lot of oxalic acid in it, so you do want to be careful and not eating too much of it. But I've heard people say that you'd have to eat, a huge bowl of oxalis before it was any kind of a problem. And I think by then probably the novelty of the flavor would wear off. But that's another delicious edible, fresh green.
What about serviceberry? Has anybody done anything with serviceberry?
I've planted it. I have a wildlife hedgerow on my land. I've planted it, and I don't know how long it takes to produce berries. Gosh, I've had it in the ground for at least 5 years, and I don't think I've seen any berries produced yet off of it. But supposedly a great wildlife shrub, but yeah, I don't know anything about the flavor or use of the berries. So I just I provided myself my own segue here. Definitely open to hearing from folks yet, but I wanted to share a couple resources with you. In the past, I've talked about some of the financial assistance programs that are available to small woodland owners. And both the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program funded by the NRCS can provide financial assistance to plant native plants. So whether you're planting them for wildlife forage, or planting them just for the sake of biodiversity, planting them for your own personal use, both of those programs can help offset the cost of planting a wider range of native plants on your land. And specifically, the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP, has a funding option for what they call cultural resource plantings. And so 2 years ago, I took an acre of marginal field on my land and planted it into all ethnobotanical trees and shrubs. And if you go onto NNRG's website and look in our blog section, you'll find I wrote an article about this ethnobotanical plantation that I put in, and it includes a list of the species that I selected. But you can get paid. I think the payment rate was $1,800 an acre. So that would include preparing the site, buying the plants, planting them, and maintaining them to make sure that they survive. But I found it to be, since I did all the labor myself, of course, it covered all of the costs of buying the plants. And I enslaved my kids to go out and help me with the planting. So I got cheap labor there. But for those of you that have, if you've got an underutilized area of your land, be it a non-forested or a forest edge or fields, anything like that, I encourage you to think about converting those areas to food production. And my basic argument was, well, if I never get around to actually harvesting this, it's at least there for the wildlife, for the birds, small mammals that forage off the berries and nuts. So it serves a dual purpose. So a little bit of a pro tip there, that we don't have to bear all the costs of that ourselves. I see a couple of hands up. Let's start with Bill Elder. Bill, what do you have to share?
Well, Kirk, I was just going to ask if we could hear from Seth on Douglas-fir gin, but I see he has his hand up. I bet it's about the same thing.
Yeah, let's turn it over to Seth and hear about his gin production.
Well, it's very timely because the season is almost upon us when the Douglas-fir buds open up. And I've only done this 1 year, but the results I thought were pretty tasty last year. You go out and pick maybe 20 or 30 fresh green Douglas-fir buds just after they've opened, and you buy a 750 ml bottle of cheap vodka and pour about a third of it into a little food processor. And I think the verb they use is macerate. You macerate the Douglas-fir buds with a third of the vodka and let it steep in a glass jar for a day or so. And it will turn the most amazing iridescent green color from all that chlorophyll. And then you strain out the plant matter, just a little regular strainer in the kitchen, and pour the rest of it back into the rest of the bottle, so you get the right strength. And it tastes very gin-like. And I'm sure you could use almost any. You could use spruce buds by the same token, right? Or Western hemlock.
Fantastic. We can have Northwest Plant happy hour. Aha.
This is the photo Seth sent me, just so you can see the color.
So in fairness, that gin is almost a year old. And so it won't have that sort of brown look of being, I don't know, like old apple cider. It will look, it'll be a vibrant green for the first, I don't know, few weeks. And definitely more, like almost the color of absinthe or something.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I saw a couple comments pop up in the chat about mushrooms. Of course, we've yet to even touch on all of the edible medicinal mushrooms out there. Anybody care to share some of their favorite mushroom foraging? I won't ask you to disclose the location. I realize that's going a little too far. Turkey tail. Yeah, I've seen the turkey tail mushrooms out there. I have yet to harvest or do anything with them. Do you have any direct experience in processing the turkey tail?
I've harvested some and then dried it and then steeped it for tea, and it was good.
I'm sorry, you made it, you turned it into a tea?
Yes, you dry the potatoes for like a week, and then you steep it in hot water, and you can add honey, and it's pretty good.
Huh. And remind me what the medicinal value or otherwise of turkey tail is?
Yeah, I think I did see it as kind of an anti-cancer, like anti-carcinoma, but it's just also like tastes good and is something you can just get from the woods. And I think it has, you know, proteins and minerals, but the proteins probably don't get in the tea.
So I have a bunch of old chunks of alder that have turkey tail on them. At what point in its growth do you pick it to make into tea, to dry it and then make into tea?
I think I picked mostly like the smaller ones, because once they get really big, it's harder to dry them all the way through.
That makes sense.
I've heard that like you should kind of dry it really thoroughly and then keep it for like an hour. You know, so you might have to reheat the tea, but it's still good.
Thank you.
Well, in the realm of mushrooms, I'll share one of my, I guess, best success stories in cultivating mushrooms. So this was probably a 30-year-old story now, but when I was first getting into cultivating edible mushrooms, one of the strategies that I'd heard about and that I tried was high stumping alder. So high stumping means that you cut a tree at 4 or 5 feet off the ground, but leave the stump intact. And then inoculate that stump with mushrooms. And the reason or the theory is that by leaving that stump intact, it continues to wick moisture up from the soil. So unlike the Japanese culture of shiitake logs, where you have to dunk the log in water periodically, you know, very high maintenance, this is a low to zero maintenance approach to growing mushrooms. And so I high stumped about a dozen alder trees. They are about 6 to 8 inches in diameter at breast height. And then I inoculated those with shiitake. And I use both the pre-inoculated little oak plugs that you can buy, as well as sawdust spawn. So I cut some wedges in the stumps, packed that with the sawdust and nailed the wedge back into place. And each of those stumps produced shiitakes for about 7 years. It was amazing. And I got 2 flushes, a spring and a fall flush out of the stumps before finally the stumps were just turned into mush, and were no longer served as a proper medium. I've yet to replicate that, but I would encourage people to try that again. And I've tried all sorts of different, I've inoculated cut logs, I've got a partially buried logs and inoculated those, and I've had very meager success with all the other methods aside from that high stumping. The other success I've had, and this is, I'll call this, I need to patent this. This is Kirk's magic formula for, oh shoot, now what's the very ephemeral mushroom that usually grows out of, I'm forgetting the name now, that grows out of in burned area, morels. There we go. So this is back when I was in my early 20s, when I was living at the Wild Thyme Farm. We were doing a lot of remodeling, and we're taking the sheetrock from the remodeling and using it as mulch in our orchard. We were also taking the wood ashes from our wood stove and sprinkling that out there as a source of mineral nutrients. And then we were capping all of that with cardboard as a weed barrier and putting wood chips on top. And every place in that orchard where we combined those 4 ingredients, the sheetrock, and likely it was the gypsum, the calcium carbonate in there that was the active ingredient, the wood ashes, the cardboard, and the wood chips. Without fail, we would get morels growing along the edge of that mulch. So I encourage you to give that a try also, and you can maybe skip the sheetrock and just get a bag of gypsum, an agricultural amendment, and try it. I did that also in my yard here when we bought our house about 15 years ago, and was first sheet mulching my garden and got very similar results out of it. So replicated that study twice with high success. So there you have it. Well, we've got about 6 minutes left. I'd love to hear from other folks. What other favorite plants are you seeking out and harvesting from your forest that we haven't heard about yet? We've got a pretty good list going, but anything else that we haven't talked about? Question about the high stumping. Did you have to girdle or kill the tree? No. So I literally just cut it at 4 or 5 feet off the ground. I did not reach down and girdle it in any other way. Alder, when it's really young, can coppice or sprout from the stem. Usually when it's a little bit older, it won't do that. So between the high stumping it and then also probably just abusing it by drilling into it, cutting into it, and inoculating it, probably knocked its immune system out, and that was enough for the alder to give up the ghost and serve as a proper medium for the shiitakes. Alex, were there any other questions in the chat that we may have overlooked, or other?
Someone asked about salal berries. Did we talk about those? Someone mentioned that they use salal berries.
Yeah, I know. I've had jam from it. I know people turn them into jam. I haven't processed salal myself. Boy, the amount of time it takes to harvest those berries and convert them into any kind of meaningful volume of jam is impressive to me. It definitely seems like an opportunity for a work party rather than just a solo expedition into the woods. Anybody else? Would love to hear 1 or 2 more anecdotes.
Well, I'll just share one other that comes from forest a little bit farther south. And I see that we have at least one Oregonian on the line. I don't know if you're far enough south that you have any Oregon myrtle, but the nuts of the Oregon myrtle, also known as the California bay laurel, are delicious when they're dried and roasted. So highly recommend those if you have any in your forest. And maybe with climate change, more of us will have that opportunity.
So Gina just mentioned that I haven't mentioned Devil's Club, and thank you for the reminder. It's been many years since I've harvested Devil's Club. That used to be one of my favorite medicinal plants to harvest. If you're not familiar with Devil's Club, I think it has one of the best botanical names of any native plant, Oplopanix horridendum. Yes, and definitely not the kind of plant that you want to run naked through a bramble of it. Obviously very thorny. It's related to ginseng. So it has very similar medicinal qualities to ginseng, a whole body tonic, a very potent medicine and spiritual medicine for First Peoples in the Northwest. Usually you harvest it in the fall when the medicinal values have gone back down into the kind of the roots of the lower stem, scrape off the outer bark, very similar to Oregon grape, and get at the cambium layer. It's the cambium layer that has the highest concentration of the medicinal alkaloids. One of the reasons that I really enjoyed harvesting and processing it was it has this incredible aroma that when you start scraping the bark off, my house would just be filled. I can't even describe the aroma. I can't compare it to anything other than just achingly medicinal. You'd smell it, and just the scent of it, you would feel emboldened, braver, stronger, stouter, healthier. And then I would dry that cambium layer and use it as a tea, again, very similar to ginseng. Unfortunately, I don't have any on my land. My neighbor, the Wild Time Farm to the north of me, has a lot of it on their north-facing slopes. Really likes to grow in those kind of wet, kind of steeper channels. But yeah, amazing medicinal plant. What about wild ginger? I don't have any experience with our wild ginger. It's not related to the native ginger, or the ginger that you normally buy in the grocery store. So I'm not sure about its edible medicinal qualities. I know the plant, but I'm not familiar with its uses. But any last thoughts? It is 8:30, so we'll wrap it up here shortly. But if anybody has a final comment or a little pearl of wisdom that they care to share, would love to hear it. Going once, going twice. It's 8:30. Our heads are full. Well, look forward to the email coming up from Alex in a few days with a list of the plants that we talked about and some other resources. This is wonderful. I love Fireside Chats where I hear more from other people than I have to talk. So this is great. This is rich learning for me. And I really appreciate all of you joining us. I don't know what the topic's going to be next month. We'll make it up sometime between now and then, but
wildlife.
What is it?
Wildlife habitat.
A wildlife habitat. That's right. Actually, yeah, we've invited, I don't know if he's accepted yet, but Ken Bevis, the wildlife biologist from our State Department of Natural Resources, absolute character. It'll be highly entertaining, if not informational and educational. Ken's great. So he'll be joining us next month to talk about wildlife habitat enhancement. So again, thank you for joining us at our March Fireside Chat, and look forward to seeing you all at future events. Take care and good night.